Now, if I was to say at least the definition of a traditional CFO, not that the role of a traditional CFO was any easier, but traditional CFO, the way we envisaged, or at least what it was, let's say a few years back, was very simple and saying they were the custodians of the balance sheet. They were involved in terms of making sure the cost structures were right. If there were projects on cost management, they got involved. It was financial reporting, compliance, making sure they're dealing with the tax compliances, tax issues, dealing with tax officers. And that was largely the role of a traditional CFO. Now, as we move forward in this today's day and age, that traditional role of a CFO, and I'm just saying I'd never say that's an easier role, but the traditional role of a CFO is changing, and it's changing for a variety of reasons. One is, if you just look at the Indian landscape, our business environment has changed. In just last 10 years, our economy size has doubled. The size and complexity of businesses have grown. Whereas we were largely a domestic market for our companies in the past. Now, today, as you really look at it, a lot more domestic companies are moving global, international. So they are expanding their horizons, and with that, there is a need for CFOs to actually expand their own horizons as well in terms of how do they deal with those challenges. World is not the same as it was earlier. There are complexities. We talk about geopolitical risk every day. We talk about ever-evolving regulations, and that puts pressure on businesses, and how do CFOs deal with it? So let me say, what is that a new CFO looks like, or a new age CFO looks like? Not a new CFO, new age CFO looks like. What are you expected to do in your CFO role? First and foremost, you're like a co-pilot to your CEO. You are actually involved very deeply with anything that happens on the business side. You're working hand in hand with that CEO to formulate a business strategy, to execute a business strategy, and that's where the role comes in. Clearly, if it was not clear in the past, now for most organizations, CFO is a clear number two. And that's what's happening. And I'll give you an example. Now, if you think about it, till about 10 years back, how many CFOs actually led an M&A transaction? They were probably giving an input to a strategy officer or CEO saying, how much money do we have? How much money can we borrow? And you can go ahead and do a transaction. I don't think that's the role of a CFO today. CFOs are actually leading business acquisition. They are leading divestitures. They are doing transaction. It's just not about a merger scheme which has to be filed with the NCLT and get an approval. Far more involved, and that's a significant shift in terms of the role that our CFO plays. Talking about technology, I think we had two great sessions on technology, and saying Mr. Nanda talked about the expectation and how technology is moving, how that can be used, and then we had the presentation from the board and saying how they are envisaging helping in terms of financial reporting, data analytics, etc. Now, traditionally, again, the technology was more saying somewhere an ERP was getting implemented, and that was anchored by a CIO, not a CFO. Today, the world has changed. You actually lead transformation through technology. And more importantly, all those transformation, whether it's an ERP implementation, you're looking at data analytics, use of AI, that's all led by the CFOs. They are actually the project in charge. They are the part of the steering committee. They're leading the steering committee. It's not the IT person. So that's a role change which has happened. Now, again, think about the world I talked about. There is enough and more complexity. You have to build a resilient organization. And for that resilient organizations, you have to constantly monitor what's happening in the supply chain world, what impacts, what changes, what tax structures. And again, in the past, a traditional CFO will say a change has happened and say how it impacts the books and the financials and the profitability of the company. Today, you are navigating through that challenge and saying, advising your business, you're advising your CEO, telling your board, and saying, yes, this is how we navigate through that challenge. You're making the strategy. So that's a significant shift. Then I talk about, I think, our friend here very beautifully put in saying it's an important thing to build trust. And I think that important aspect of a CFO role has not gone away in terms of the quality of financial reporting, timeliness of that, making sure everything works, engagement with the board, engagement with other stakeholders, which can be investors, can be employees. It has to be wider stakeholders, which actually CFOs build trust with. And it's important to do that. Things that in the past, and I'll give you an example. In the past, a CFO was dealing with regulators, but the interaction with regulators was more to say what I call as meeting a tax officer, going through an assessment process, etc. But that's a limited part of what CFO does on the regulatory front today. Today's world, a CFO is actually leading and engaging on policy discussion with regulators, taking the point of view of the company and the industry to the regulator and saying, can you shape a policy which is going to benefit the business? That part of change which has come in wasn't there. And for that to happen, again, the CFO needs to be aware of what's happening globally, what's happening in their business, which policy benefits not only the company but the country. Because if a regulator has to change a policy, it has to be for the wider benefit, which goes beyond just the company. Now, let me give you some data point of this evidence of change. So there is a group called RGP, and they did a survey in June 2025. And actually, their survey pointed out that 74% of the CFOs get involved with anything to do with the enterprise-wide discussions and decisions. And 93% of the CFOs actually get involved with anything to do with business strategy. Any tactical change, strategic change, CFOs are involved, which is a huge shift from the past. PwC did a survey in June 2025. That's on the use of technology. Today, 58% of the CFOs are actively thinking about, and I'm not talking about ERP, but thinking about data analytics and use of AI in their businesses. And they're on that journey. Similarly, Deloitte did a survey in June 2024. And this is important. We talk about sustainability. Most people think there is, in large corporations at least, there is a sustainability officer who would lead the sustainability reporting, etc. You were surprised to know that survey actually said that 1/3 of the large corporations, CFO lead the ESG reporting, the sustainability policies, etc., which is far higher than the sustainability officer who's made in charge of that reporting. So that's another key aspect of what's happening. But let me also give you another data point, which is not so good, which is saying Gartner came out with a report, and they said that the finance people and CFOs actually lack these skills on the technology, AI, and there is a long road to travel for the finance professionals. So that's a challenge for you to say, not only do you upskill yourself, but your teams and wider teams to actually get onto the bandwagon of technology. That's what's going to happen. So what is that a new CFO is expected to do? Mastering technology? Absolutely. And the technology world is going to change significantly. That's something that you will have to work on. As I talked about sustainability, sustainability is just not about reporting. Sustainability is actually making your business resilient, making sure what's happening. Climate change is a huge risk. We have seen in India itself what happened with the rains this year. There were enough business disruption. How do you work with your business to make sure you deal with those things? Scenario planning. I think Mr. Nanda very, very elaborately covered that scenario planning, so I'm not going to dwell into that, but he did talk about how CFOs deal with scenario planning and value creation. People and culture is something that I think gets, I would say, lesser recognition than what it should. But unless you build teams which are ready for future, unless you build a culture, there is no way that you can operate with your teams the way you used to operate 20 years back. The generation which comes in today comes in with very different expectation in terms of what a work should entail. And unless you have a highly motivated team working with you, I don't think you can drive the changes and the business things that you intend to do. Let me give you a few examples of how CFOs have been playing that part. Apple is a great company. And I think we talk about Tim Cook more often, or we know him more often than anything else in terms of whatever is happening in Apple. But if you think about their CFO, Luca Mastri, what he has done is he has actually led through some of the very big transformation changes from a technology internally in Apple. They use data analytics extensively. They use AI extensively. And he has made sure that Apple is actually fit for future as an organization internally. And that's the part he's leading. So he's critical to their technology front. Again, underreported in the media, but that's what he's helped Tim Cook do it. And Tim Cook has acknowledged that on a couple of occasions now, that how does his CFO help him run the business. And if you look at it, Apple is an organization which does huge capital investment. They do buybacks. They've done shareholder engagement, etc. All of them have been led by their CFO, Luca. Let me give you an example closer home of saying how CFOs are changing. In the past, we hardly heard about a CFO actually becoming a CEO or an MD, whatever we may call it. But there are many examples today in the Indian context as well. One name which comes in, Rajesh Gopinathan, illustrious TCS CFO, who then became the TCS CEO and led that role very, very admirably. So I think CFOs today, because of their involvement in the business, their understanding of the business, are actually geared up to run their complexities of business as well. Let me just now summarize my session to say, what should you be looking at as a CFO? Lean into technology. There's no way that any of us can walk away from our technology thing. So learn what's happening on technology front, embrace it, challenge your staff to adopt it as well. Tell a story beyond numbers. A lot of time reporting is only about numbers and what's going to happen. But I think investors, the stakeholders, need story beyond numbers. And when you put out your reports, whether it's quarter on quarter, semi-annual, annual, think about what do you want to communicate in terms of the purpose of the company, numbers which investors can lap, and wider stakeholders can talk about. Invest in your people. I've spoken about it, but unless you're invested in your people, some of these changes will never happen. Now, again, another thing is, traditionally, we have seen a CFO to be someone who's conservative, who's supposed to be the most conservative person in the business world. But I think time has come where CFOs have to change. They have to become bolder to lead into the business world, which is full of opportunities, full of complexities, and India will continue to grow, whether it's 8 trillion or some other numbers by 2030, but the growth is here to stay, the complexity is here to stay, and you have to be bold. So with that, I will say you are a strategic partner, lead that change, drive it with confidence, and drive it with agility. With that, thank you so much.